Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight, we're gonna hear some stories about creepers. Not from Minecraft, the creepy guys who are always there to lurch and to make you feel uncomfortable. But anyway, for now, it's time to let the darkness take control. When I first met the Bagman, I was 16. I didn't even think he was anything to worry about at the time. He just passed me by when I was biking around in one of my city's forest preserves called Riverside. Riverside was always a place where I could go when I was feeling stressed or anxious. So when I passed by this rugged-looking guy in the middle of the woods, I didn't think much of it. I had other things on my mind, and for all I know, I could have looked pretty rugged myself, being all sweaty and wearing a black hoodie, and biking around like a maniac. He and I were similarly dressed. I didn't have long to look at him, as I was passing by on my bike pretty quickly, but he was wearing black sweatpants that were ripped in several places, along with muddy white shoes and a black hoodie, which he wore with the hood down. I could also make out that he was a pretty big guy in all areas. He was fairly wide and actually pretty tall. His hair was brown and down to his shoulders. I couldn't really make out his face at the time, but little did I know I would see it in a few weeks. When he saw me coming towards him on my bike, he held up his hand all excitedly and waved at me, and then began to jog while I got closer. I thought at the time that maybe he was out here exercising like me, and seeing me made him remember to start running again or something. But as I passed him, he got so close to my bike that he almost bumped into me. I had to swerve a little to the right to try and avoid him, barely missing him. When I passed him, I kind of heard him shout something back to me, but I couldn't really understand what it was because I had my headphones in. I shrugged at the situation and continued to bike back to my car. It took me a few minutes to get back to the parking lot. I was pretty exhausted as I loaded my bike into the back of the minivan. Once I closed the trunk, I looked around for a moment to see if the guy had been around. I didn't see him, but the only other car that was parked there was directly across from me on the other side of the lot. It was a long, white van, like the stereotypical pedophile van. It was dirty and muddy, like the man driving it, and the windows were tinted so that you couldn't see the inside. Thinking back on this situation now, it could have been totally possible that the bagman followed behind me all the way back into this parking lot and had gotten into his creepy van and was in there while I was staring at that vehicle. He could have been watching me through those dark windows, and I wouldn't have even known. When I pulled out the parking lot, I made sure that the van stayed in its place as I passed by and drove home. That was my first encounter with the bagman. But obviously, that meeting isn't what gave him his name. A little over 3 weeks later, after my experience at the Riverside, I was home alone and it was approximately 4 p.m. I was just watching YouTube on my phone while laying in bed upstairs in my room. My dog was next to me, and we were both just chilling until my dad came home from work. While I was up, I go to the bedroom. I heard the doorbell ring, and then 2 loud bangs on the door. Now usually, when there's someone pounding on the door like that, it's almost always my mum, because she, for some reason, likes to freak out the dog when she gets home, and a few loud bangs on the door would do just the trick. So my dog went running out of my room and tore down the steps to the front door. I followed behind him, but didn't really feel like running. When I finally get to the door, I swung it open, fully expecting to see my mum, but it wasn't her. It was the guy from Riverside. He was just staring at me with this big black garbage bag in his hand. He was wearing almost the exact same outfit that he was wearing when I saw him last, except his shoes, which were now all clean. I looked up at his face and saw that he had a poorly trimmed beard that covered almost all of it. His eyes were a bright blue, and they stared down at me. He spoke before I had a chance to say anything. Now, this will be a rough paraphrase of what he said, but it's something like this. "Hi there, young man. Is Melanie around? I'd love to see her." No, I don't know who that is." "Sorry. I actually knew who she was, because she lived a few houses down. Not that I wanted to tell this guy." I think at this point I had given him a smile to try and act like I wasn't completely freaked out. You see, I always park my minivan right outside my house, so it's always in view whenever I'm home. This means that he probably recognized it and me. "I think I know you from somewhere, pal." His voice was deep and haunting, and just kind of left me stunned. I stood there and didn't say anything, shrugged my shoulders, and that's when he started to shake the bag. I didn't really know how else to describe it. He was just shaking the bag up and down. I never actually saw what was inside, but it sounded like a whole bunch of metal cookie cutters rattling around. The contents were poking and stretching, and the bag was out at weird angles. He was just staring at me as he shook the bag and inched closer. "Are you sure you don't know where Melanie is?" He continued to shake the bag as he encroached on my space until we were nearly touching. My breath was shaky, and I was looking down at the ground like a dog that had just gotten into trouble for peeing on the couch. Then I snapped and pushed him away from me as hard as I could. His skin was flabby and soft, and his shirt felt greasy. I used all my strength to get him away from me. I didn't look back as I did a 180 and sped back into my house, slamming the door, and once I was back inside, I could hear him pound his heavy arms against the door and the clamoring of whatever was in the bag. He banged on the door for maybe 30 seconds before he stopped abruptly. I quickly sped towards the window to see if he was still wandering there, and I moved to the side to get a better angle of the doorway. I saw him looking back at me. When we met eyes, he immediately started running back to his van, which was parked across the street. I recognized that it was the same one from the Riverside. I was disappointed to see that there weren't any front license plate numbers, but as the van started to move and pass my house, I took down the number and letters that were on the back of the van, and I still have them written down on my phone. Since that incident, I haven't seen the man since, and I notified Melanie that some man was asking around for her. She said she had no idea who it might be, but would tell her parents just so that they could keep a lookout too. After about a year, my mum and I were having lunch, and she was scrolling through Facebook when she came upon a post from a woman that lived in a state neighbouring ours. The woman wrote that a man driving a white van drove up to her house and knocked on the door, which her youngest daughter answered. The man had apparently asked her to get into his van because he had the circus in there. Apparently the mum came to the door before anything happened. Apparently the man was still being really creepy. Unfortunately, the woman didn't post a description of the name or the man, but she definitely remembers the white van. Now, I don't know exactly what the critics mean Now, I don't know exactly what the circus means, but I'm almost positive it's the same man that visited my house, and I'm pretty sure he's still out there preying on people, because just yesterday the local news said that they interviewed a 9-year-old girl that was approached by a man driving a white van. So please, if you live in central Illinois in the US, watch out for anyone matching the description. You may find him. True crime was, and is, one of my favorite genres of entertainment. I loved reading about serial killers and stalkers, and things like that, because none of it had ever touched my life personally. But since this happened, it's become much less rooted in fantasy, and I'm looking out for red flags. During my sophomore year in college, I was a volunteer teaching assistant for an on-campus international student program in the Northeast. Basically, it was the last step students had to take to get a certificate telling potential schools and employers, I can speak English really well, and here's proof. The students tended to come in groups selected by programs in their home countries. So one semester we might have a lot of Chinese and Brazilian students, and the next a whole bunch of Koreans and Saudi Arabians. This particular semester there were a lot of people from Mexico, and they all lived in an off-campus housing complex called the Suites. Now, my position. As I've said, I was a volunteer. I had some friends from the program in the past, and they knew I wanted to teach English abroad. So they put in a good word with me for the staff, so that I could get some practical skills and experience under my belt. Being as informal an arrangement as it was, I had no qualms about forming personal relationships with the students. In fact, a few of us are still good friends today. I wasn't a very outgoing person at the time, and though I had many friends, I hardly ever drank, and had never been to a party. Hearing this, the Mexican students who threw parties every weekend insisted that I come to the next one. The party was fun, and comprised almost exclusively of international students, which was nice because I knew most of them. I got really drunk, and had fluent conversations in languages I had very loose grasps on. Everything was going great, until a few of us retreated into a friend's dorm for some air. Checking their phones, a few girls realized that Pamela had not returned from Main Street yet, and no one can get a hold of her. Pamela was a 19-year-old Mexican student, and had gone to a local eatery after lessons that day in order to meet one of the teachers for a private tutoring session. The session was scheduled for 5 p.m. and should not have gone longer than 7:30. It was 11:30 at this point, and the girls were, understandably, worried. I asked which teacher the tutoring session was with, and they told me it was with Charles. Immediately my skin crawled. There were about 5 teachers at the facility, and Charles was by far the sketchiest. He was around 40 years old, half American, half Japanese, with short but visibly flat-ironed black hair that partially covered his glasses. He honestly looked like a stereotypical weirdo. I'd tried to hop around between classrooms on a weekly basis to get a feel for different teaching methods, but I cut my week with Charles short because he was just so creepy. The way he spoke to his students was condescending and mildly inappropriate, commenting on a girl's blouse or telling risque stories about his own wild college years and how they ought to take a leaf out of his book. All of this in the middle of a class, mind you. Additionally, He would always get uncomfortably close to the Latina students, grabbing their shoulders, touching the smalls of their back, and even grazing their breasts occasionally. He crept me out, as well as everyone else. After sharing some creepy Charles stories, we were all freaked out and ready to do something. Last anyone had heard from Pam was at 5:15, when she texted and said her phone was about to die, but she would figure out a way home when the tutoring was complete. It was the middle of winter in northeastern US, and a blizzard warning was in effect. The diner she was at was a 3-mile walk from the suites, and a few girls suggested she was bunkering down until the warning let up. The problem was, that could be days. Another theory was that she got lost trying to find her way home, and was now in the snow. None of us had a car, so we told a few of the boys and they formed a search party, and started walking to Main Street. Just a few minutes later, they returned with a snow-covered Pamela in their midst. Being from Mexico, none of these people had packed properly for a brutal winter, so when they found her she was freezing and soaked to the bone. After a hot shower and relaxing for a bit, she told us in Spanish what had happened. When she arrived at the diner, Charles was nowhere to be found. She waited for 40 minutes and was just about to leave, knowing that a storm was coming, when he finally showed up. He apologized and said that he was just upstairs and had dozed off. He lived in the upstairs apartment, you see, and asked if she wouldn't mind taking the lesson there where it was more quiet. Being a shy, somewhat reserved person who spoke little English, she complied. When upstairs, he started asking her all sorts of questions about herself. Most she could barely answer. And when she stumbled, he would laugh and chastise her for her mistakes. As she said it, he tutored her for about an hour, and then made them both dinner. It was 7 p.m. by now, and Pam wanted to leave, but he told her to eat, and that he would drive her home afterwards. It was pitch dark, and the storm was picking up considerably. A girl like you shouldn't be walking home at night, he told her. Pam was nervous, but she knew he was right, and she wasn't confident she'd even be able to find her way home in all this snow, so she stayed. When they finished eating, Pamela went for the door, but he stopped her and asked if she would do him a favor. He went into his bedroom and beckoned for her to follow. Hesitant as she was, she peeked into the room and saw a full photo studio set up against the wall facing the bed. He told her to stand in front of the lights so that he could take a few photos and then he'd take her home. Frightened and confused in a country she was unfamiliar with a man she thought she could trust, she did as she was told, and after a few minutes, the requests got darker. He showed her pictures of other girls, mostly college-age Latinas, who he had taken pictures of in various positions and state of undress, and asked her if she would do some of those poses. She said no, she didn't want to undress. So he pulled a pair of boxer shorts and a tank top out of his top drawer and tossed them at her. Put these on then. Just a few pictures and then we'll go. I promise. She went into the bathroom to change into the clothes he'd given her, and just sat there, cursing at her dead phone on the brink of tears. For 5, 10, and 15 minutes, she couldn't even remember how long she sat there, until he started knocking at the door. Pamela, come on. I was just kidding. Come out of there. I'll take you home now. Not completely trusting him, but knowing there was no other way to get out of this situation, she exited the bathroom He apologized for making her feel uncomfortable and offered to drive her home, at which point she grabbed her things, said she was fine walking, and left. He didn't go after her, and he didn't try to stop her. She did, in fact, end up getting lost and walking around town for over an hour. She did, in fact, end up getting lost and walked around town for over an hour before the boys found her a few blocks from the complex. We urged her to tell this story to the police, but they said technically no crime was committed, so she told the head of the program. He accepted it a little too easily, as if he expected it, and we later found out this was not the first time something like this had happened. We already knew it wasn't, because he had pictures of other girls, but an especially ugly story found its way to us. Apparently, the previous year, a South American girl was really struggling in class and received tutoring from Charles. After 2 or 3 sessions, she stopped going despite her grades not improving. She became exceedingly closed off and stopped going out altogether, often missing classes. After a few weeks, she dropped out of the program and flew back home. No one knew her well enough to ask why, but they all had a sneaking suspicion it was because of Charles. After hearing Pamela's experience, the program immediately dropped Charles as a teacher, which just proves that this was not the first complaint against him. This last bit might just be a rumor, but I heard from a pretty solid source that after Pamela filed the complaint, the police checked him out, and Charles wasn't even his real name. Turns out he'd been using fake information to get teaching gigs around the country for the past 5 to 10 years, and was actually a registered sex offender. He's probably in jail right now, but in any case, Charles, or whatever your name is, who likes to use your authority to prey on vulnerable Latina girls who are alone in new countries, let's not meet. This past October, I got the lucky chance to finally work at a haunted house. It's been my dream job since a really young age, and a friend of mine hooked me up with the gig. Maddie had worked at this haunted house the previous year and told me how fun and thrilling it was. I agreed to work with her, and the job was overall amazing. I played Regan from The Exorcist, and my fellow co-workers said I was one of the best acts in the attraction. My bosses were also pretty proud, and even posted a video of me on their Facebook. The job was just pure delight, except for one of the workers. Besides getting home at around 1 in the morning and losing my voice due to constantly screaming, this creepy co-worker almost soured the whole experience for me. Daniel was in his mid-40s. He worked in the haunted house as a butcher. He was a tall and brawny guy, definitely far more intimidating than my other co-workers, who were teenagers. I was 17. So was Maddie. He's bald and had a few tattoos on his arms. Any attempts at conversation were always awkward. I'm not saying that in a judging manner, it was just visible that something was a bit off about this guy. Daniel first started to talk to me after my first shift. He was complimenting my performance and how loud I could scream, which I didn't find odd at all. All the other workers were complimenting me as well, so him mentioning it wasn't out of the ordinary. I thanked him, we exchanged names, shook hands, and that was the end of my shift. Every shift that followed the first, Daniel would always compliment me, shake my hand, and asked me for my name again, even though I'd already told him a handful of times. Then his creepiness only increased. One night, while all the workers are lining up to clock out and leave, Daniel goes on a huge rant to Maddie and me about his personal life. He mentions how much he hates his ex-wife and would love to beat her up because how she abused him. Daniel also said he is divorcing his current wife, whom he says that he still loves. I was just baffled that he, out of the blue, decided to rant about personal issues to two teenagers. But I brushed it off, clocked out, and Maddie and I drove home. On the ride home, I told Maddie how odd Daniel is, and she agreed, but argued that he's nice. So keep in mind that Maddie knew I was not particularly fond of Daniel and wanted nothing to do with him. A few shifts later, the worst incident involving Daniel occurred. The haunted house was closed, and all the workers were scrubbing off their grotesque makeup and changing back into their regular clothes. I was out of the break room washing off my makeup with about 6 other people in the room with me, including Maddie and Daniel. Out of nowhere, Daniel just blurts out, "Man, my ride just cancelled on me." I could obviously tell that this was one of those statements where he is fishing for attention. I kept my trap shut and continued washing off my nasty makeup. Maddie, being an overly generous and sometimes airheaded teen, quickly offered to give him a ride. The very moment those words fell from her mouth, my heart sunk to the pit of my stomach. Maddie was also taking me home that night, since we alternated who drove to work. My eyes quickly shifted to Maddie, who somehow didn't see the strangeness in two teenagers giving a 45-year-old man a ride home at midnight. Daniel said very happily, "Thank you so much," and detailed where he lived, knowing I couldn't just blurt out, "No," in front of Daniel. I gave Maddie a stern look and left the room. Bewildered, I walked out of the room to change out of my sweat-drained dress and into my normal clothes with the notion that I am about to endure an awkward and creepy car ride with Daniel. I was livid at Maddie. She knew that Daniel frightened me and never thought to think before she blurted out her offer. I stayed back in the dressing room, too scared to hop in the car with Daniel, but I knew I couldn't stay there forever. So I built up some courage and returned to the break room where Maddie was. Daniel was no longer there, but Maddie was there as well as a few other workers. She informed me that another worker, a very sweet woman who's about Daniel's age, was going to take him home instead of us, and a huge wave of relief washed over me. On our way home, I asked Maddie why the plans changed. What she said further corrected my suspicion. While I was changing out of my exorcist costume, our boss Joey pulled Maddie into his office to say that she couldn't take Daniel home. He elaborates how Daniel is bipolar and can get angry very easily and is violent, and it's not safe for two teenage girls to be alone with him in the middle of the night. That's when the older woman offered to take Daniel home. This incident infuriates me in 2 ways. 1. Why would a grown man think it's okay for two teenage girls to take him home? And 2. How could Maddie be so blind and lack vital common sense to know this was not a good idea? Thankfully, that moment passed, but there's still one more incident that remains. Ever since the last scenario, Daniel stopped talking to me. If I had to guess, Joey probably told him to stop. About the second to last night at working in the haunted house, Daniel got hurt. While everyone is getting ready and putting makeup on, Daniel enters the break room with a gnarly gash on the top of his head and is spurting out pools of blood. We all thought it was really good makeup at the time, but Daniel claims he was messing with the garage door inside the attraction and it fell on his head. For such a deep cut that was bleeding profusely, Daniel seemed way too nonchalant and insisted that he didn't need medical attention. He just sat in the break room for a while, with the wound just pouring blood while we all applied our makeup. A part of me feels like wounding himself was intentional, but I could be wrong. He just seems way too chill about it all. And that's that. It was really enough to shake me at the time every time I saw him. Thankfully, the room I was positioned in was nowhere near his, so he was never in my room alone. There is one further update I would also like to include. Just a few days ago, I was informed of something that really made my heart stop. Apparently, about a month ago, after the haunted house had closed, Daniel killed himself. I wasn't told how, not that that's any of my business, but the news came out of nowhere. I pray his family is doing alright, and that Daniel is no longer suffering. This happened almost 2 years ago. It was summertime, and I was about to turn 21. Even after the fact, I still looked as though I was underage. For reference, I'm a female, fairly short and baby-faced. This particular summer I worked at a truck stop combined with 2 fast food chains. I worked in one of the fast food areas. Something else to mention is that this truck stop was located right next to a very busy highway. This meant that we received an abundance of customers on a daily basis. Our fast food chain was employed only by women, particularly high school students, as the area did not have many places to find work. Once I began working there, I immediately began to notice that one man stood out every time he came into our workplace. This man was in his 40s with black hair, thin stick, dressed in all black, and wearing a fedora. No matter what, he always wore the fedora. As someone who had just started working there, I really made it a point to focus on making connections with the customers, like making eye contact, introducing myself, and smiling a lot. Basically, just trying to be the best employee that I could be. The first time this man came in, he was straight-faced and did not speak much. I took his order, and when he left, my co-workers began to talk about how he was a weird guy. Fedora Man would come into our workplace every single day and comment on my very underage co-workers' appearance, even go as far as to ask them for their phone numbers. My co-workers have told him many times that they are not interested, underage and the like, but this did nothing to deter him. I was immediately concerned, but tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. My second encounter with Fedora Man was vastly different. This time Fedora Man seemed eager to see me. I recall so vividly how he watched me serve every single customer in line. Each time he got closer to ordering, his smile would grow wider and wider. Once it was his turn, the first thing that came out of his mouth was, "You're a lot nicer than all the girls here." Not once did that creepy smile leave his face. I don't think I even saw him blink. I thanked him and continued with his order. Fedora Man thanked me and off he went. After about an hour or so of serving customers, I was asked by the manager to step into his office. Once inside, my manager gave me a heads up that Fedora Man called our gas station to personally let her know that I was a great addition to the team. Fedora Man also asked for my number. My manager hoped that by telling him that I was underage, even though I wasn't, and this didn't stop him from hitting on my other underage co-workers, that this would deter him from trying to get my number. His exact words per my manager were, "I don't mind a little jailbait." My manager let Fedora Man know that this was incredibly inappropriate, and Fedora Man laughed and then hung up the phone. As he had tried asking for multiple girls their numbers, she decided to finally do something about it and notified our male supervisor. The next day, the Fedora Man was approached by our supervisor as he walked into the store. They talked for a few moments before he stomped out, and he did not look happy. Later on, my manager would tell us that our supervisor did not ban Fedora Man from the store, but rather let him know that he was making us uncomfortable. This did not deter Fedora Man, as he returned the next day and specifically asked for me. I was nervous but still served him, as it was my job. This time, Fedora Man asked for my number in person. If I wasn't working, I would have said, "Hell to the no," but as I was on the clock, I politely declined. Fedora Man continued to smile, showing all of his teeth. He continued to return every single day, and specifically asked for me. After a few days of this going on, I finally broke down and asked to work in the back of the store every time he came in, so that I could avoid seeing him. Fedora Man made me incredibly uncomfortable, and I wanted to avoid seeing him as much as possible. The last time I ever saw him was a week or two right before summer's end. After weeks of trying to desperately avoid him, things finally came to a boil. On this day, I worked the early shift, and therefore began doing the usual stuff. Turning on machines, prepping items, and my manager was the only one there with me. She'd stepped out for a little cigarette break. Usually, we do not get customers in that early. My guard was down since I was in the back of the store where no customers were allowed, and I had some music playing. I was singing along to the music and prepping for the day when I saw a black mass start in front of me. I turned off my music and asked if someone was there. No answer. As I was already jittery from Fedora Man, I simply told myself that I was overreacting and turned my music back on once more. After a few moments, I felt someone behind me. I turned, and who do you think it was? Fedora Man. I let out a yelp in surprise, which only made him laugh heartily. He stated that he was hungry and wanted some food. I immediately began to scold him and reminded him this was an area for workers only. At this point, my manager returns from her cigarette break and sees that he's in the back of the store. She shouts at him to leave and states, "She doesn't even like you," in the biggest voice that she could muster. Fedora Man smiled his toothy smile and simply walked to the front of the store. I refused to serve him and let my manager know that he needs to be banned. I wish I could say this story had a happy ending, but it doesn't. I ended up leaving that job a week later and haven't got back since. I occasionally talk to my old co-workers, and they've let me know that Fedora Man still comes in every day, hitting on the underage girls there and asking when I will be coming back to work. I was 9 years old, and we were all packed into my mother's car on a trip to visit family for the Thanksgiving holidays. Our trip took us through Tuckersville, Arkansas, and it just happened that we needed to make a pit stop for gas at the T-Rix there. I don't know if it's still there. The last time I was by that way was 2012. My mother, sister and I got out of the car and made our way inside to use the restroom. There was a man in a beige coat and matching cowboy hat crossing the pavement nearly even with us, though none of us saw him get out of his car or anything. He made the building before us and ended up standing beside the door, faced as if he was staring at the ice coolers along the side of the building. My mother urged us both to pass him and into the well-lit building. My mum must have had a gut reaction, because when we were all done with what we needed to do, she held us back by the shoulder and told us to wait for our stepfather. As we wandered the store, wasting time for my stepdad to finish pumping gas, the man remained where he had been when we had come in. I kept glancing at him, feeling more and more creeped out. It took quite a while for my stepdad to come in after us. I guess he hadn't needed to use the restroom and assumed we'd come out to meet him. And that whole time, the cowboy man stood by the door motionless. Finally, my stepfather came through the door, huffing in frustration because it was late at night and he was ready to get back on the road. When he asked my mum what took us so long, she answered that she was waiting for the man to leave. My stepdad raised an eyebrow. What man? In his frustration, he apparently hadn't noticed the man in the cowboy hat. That one, my mother said, suddenly very pale. She was pointing out the window, where we all saw that the man had turned to face into the store. He was grinning at us. I'm sure it was the shadow from his hat, but his eyes were just pools of darkness, and my 9-year-old brain registered this as having no eyes at all. We wound up waiting in that store for a solid 20 minutes, that man standing there grinning at us the whole time. It seemed like no one else had noticed him. The employees paid him no mind. Finally, when my mother and stepfather were discussing making a break for it, a middle-aged woman walked through the door. She made a purchase quickly and left. As the door closed behind her, the cowboy hat man very slowly turned away from us as he moved to follow her. We didn't stick around to see what happened. As soon as the door cleared, my parents hustled out of the building and into the car. My stepfather burnt rubber pulling out of the parking lot. We've shared this story many times trying to see if our memories match up. I know I've wondered if it was a hallucination, but there's no way that 4 people could hallucinate the exact same thing. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's video. If you did, please don't forget to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts, as they go a long way. And if you're new here, subscribe and press the bell icon to be updated every time I post new spooks. Sorry for not posting yesterday. I was absolutely exhausted after the first stage of the moving, and I'm pretty exhausted now. We had to reorganize some stuff, and it is really tiring. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, but until then guys, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.